Hello, my 11 fans who I haven't talked to in about 6 months. Today I want to discuss something incredibly stupid, so unfathomably dumb, and such a waste of time that you wouldn't even be able to imagine it. I, my friends, really like philosophy, and I really like political philosophy. So today we're gonna philosophically analyze a little movie called Barbie about these very deep, woke plastic dolls. So I hope you'll join me on this ride, and I love my life. Watching the Barbie movie was an absolute blast. You know, I went in expecting like a very superficial movie about plastic dolls with maybe a little bit of feministic social commentary, but this movie just delivered a very nice feminist message, and it really showcases this little issue we have in our world called patriarchy in a way that's very easy to understand. I initially went to the cinema to watch this movie because my friend got us tickets, and in hypocritical, very superficial spirit, we decided it would be fun to join the trend and just go all pink and go see this movie. Going into the cinema, I was filled with doubt. I'm a person who really appreciates a good message in a movie, and I'm like, how good could a message be in a movie that had to be approved by this company that like mass-produced plastics and pushed unrealistic female body standards, right? Well, you'd be surprised, because both of these things are addressed in the movie, and it really lets you feel the presence of philosophy in our new generation, and that was very positively surprising. Anyways, I'm gonna go stupid mode now and talk about this movie. So this movie starts off with a quick and very exaggerated reminder of what Barbie actually is, which is then followed by a quick trip through the newly made Barbie world for this movie. After a little bit of Barbie action, if you ever thought this movie was just a regular Barbie adventure, you'd realize you're completely wrong about 8 minutes into this movie when it just starts falling apart. Our good old beloved Ken starts expressing this pain that his entire identity is based on Barbie's attention, and we basically get to learn that in this world, the Barbie world, is where the women rule and the men are oppressed. We see some very desperate attempts from Ken to try to get Barbie's attention, but it's quite pathetic, to be honest. Not too long after this, Barbie starts expressing existential thoughts and thoughts about death. So, as you might have guessed by now, this clearly isn't just an average Barbie movie. Later in this movie, this becomes much more apparent as Barbie decides to travel to the real world after learning that her problems with cellulite and existential thoughts can only be fixed by finding her owner in what to them would be the parallel universe that is the real world. Anyway, Barbie, she comes to terms with this, and she starts driving, but wouldn't you know it, Ken is in the back of the truck with her, and now they have to go through the real world together. Could this get any worse? Not too long after, they arrive in the real world, and to Ken's delight, maybe to Barbie's shock, there's this little thing called patriarchy, and they get to experience this firsthand. Ken is obviously pretty ecstatic since he's been oppressed his entire life in the Barbie world. And he even has this moment where he spotted some men on a couple of horses, and that's apparently enough cause for him to believe that not only men rule the world, but apparently horses and men rule the world. Anyways, while Barbie is too busy trying to find her owner in the parallel universe that is the real world to solve her cellulite and depressive existential thoughts, Ken realizes that he doesn't need to be oppressed. He could travel back to the Barbie world and make men rule everything there as well. So that he does. Ken travels back to the Barbie world and starts counteracting the patriarchy. Or that would be the opposite. Yeah, he starts taking back control from the women. Mind you, he does do this in a very goofy and duty way, and it's so cringe, but it's so funny. After meeting up with her real-world owner, Barbie returns to Barbie Land to find it overrun by revolutionists. I cannot take myself seriously. This is a movie about, like, plastic dolls and six-packs. What the fuck am I doing? Anyways, after seeing the Kens take over the Barbie world, I think a part of the feminist audience who went to see this movie maybe got a little bit more resistance towards men in general for just not letting women rule anything. And here's where it gets pretty interesting, if you ask me, and it's why I decided to make this video. You have to remember that in this Barbie world, it is the men that are oppressed. It's actually the women who stand in debt to the men for oppressing them their entire lives. And I think it's supposed to represent a mirrored version of our real world. Now, you probably realize by now that this is a very feministic movie. And for anyone who has a little bit of resistance towards feminist values for whatever reasons, I argue you might want to stick with me because I want to balance things out. I had an argument with someone on TikTok, of all places, with someone who thought the Kens were just awful for taking over the Barbie world, even after they've been oppressed their entire life. And that's what I tried to argue, but what I got back was that I was apparently mansplaining and I can't argue my case. I asked this person, aren't you doing the exact same thing? And the answer I got was no, because this person was a woman, and apparently women can't mansplain. God fucking damn it, guys. I love feminist values, I love equality, I love the new generation of values, but sometimes you really just gotta fight through it, you know what I mean? So yeah, I argue that maybe the Kens aren't totally in the wrong. I argue that if this is supposed to be a parallel to the real world, then wouldn't the Kens taking over the Barbie world be the same as women taking over the real world? And would you really be mad at women for taking over power after being oppressed for so many years? Well, apparently no, because the response I was met with was that I was part of the problem, and I do not understand my privilege. So naturally, my evil man brain quickly decided that this person doesn't entirely understand my argument, and somehow doesn't realize that I'm actually leaning towards the feminist side without going as far as to lean into misandrism. But yeah, the Kens have their little revolution, and not too long after, the Barbie starts plotting to take back Barbie Land that was once theirs. The way they do this, though, is by manipulation and clever strategies such as making all the men turn against each other by using their sensitive egos. While all the Kens are distracted fighting each other, the Barbies go to vote to make sure the women rule everything once again. Once Barbie Land is taken back, Ken realizes that he was wrong for going too far and attempting to take over absolutely everything. He has a mental breakdown over this, and the movie makes him look very stupid. But Barbie goes after him to apologize for treating him like he was nothing for all this time before all of this happened. She starts comforting him and starts letting him know what really needs to be done, which is Ken needs to create an identity of being just Ken. This is a giant part of the movie, is just Ken. The idea of him being without her attention. I saw a lot of people on social media that were mad at the idea that Barbie apologizes to Ken, but I remind you, once again, the Kens have been oppressed their entire lives. An apology in this situation isn't only mature, it might be the only right thing to do. The movie, however, treats this apology like it's a super surprisingly mature thing for Barbie to do. We move on, and the Kens start embracing their new freedom. They're happy to start living independent of the Barbie's attention, and they're happy to start their new identity. Everyone has their little happy moment, and in the heat of the moment, the Kens ask if they can have some of the societal power back. The movie puts them in a very childish light while they're doing this, but either way, you get the point. The Barbies refuse and insist on keeping the power, and the Kens just seem to accept this, and all seems happy. There's even a narrator over the movie that says that maybe the women should keep the power for now, and maybe one day the men in the Barbie world could have as much power as the women in the real world. Yeah. Anyways, the rest of the movie is really beautiful, and it's about our main character Barbie really wanting to be a real woman. We have all these beautiful, like, supposed to be nostalgic clips with this really beautiful song from Billie Eilish, and this part of the movie was great, to be honest. My problem with the movie starts a little before that, though, as you might have realized by now. I was left with a really warm feeling that the political scales have been tipped in the right direction after this movie, but also a little frustrated that the movie doesn't see the issues in the Barbies keeping all the power. It's pretty obvious to say that if the goal with feminism in this movie was equality, then I am not satisfied. The thing about this movie was that I was positively surprised almost all the way through. I left the cinema feeling happy, and to my surprise, I noticed my friend not being too satisfied. For context, my friend is a pretty feministic woman, and I asked her to elaborate, of course. Ken and his issues have been presented like a joke through this entire movie. He's been shown as so much of what feminist women hate about men. This really threw me off when I thought about it after she said it, because in this fictional world, the unbalance really affects the men negatively. It felt like this movie was seriously trying to balance things out and tip the political scales in the right direction, but doing so while also pleasing the more radical feminists that might be in the audience. Doing so by just making men look bad in general. The final goal seems to have been balance, but the movie misses the mark by just a tiny bit. The Kens are being presented as a joke, and the Barbies keep the power in the end. And those two things are just a tiny bit off. This might be a bit of a side topic, but I think it's relevant anyways. The idea of eye for an eye has always been a thing, and our feelings very often tell us to hurt the people who have done us wrong. We even see Ken doing this to Barbie as a result of a lot of built-up anger that he's gotten from being oppressed for so long. After taking over, he starts rubbing it in Barbie's face and basically trying to make her feel like he's always felt. I hate that some people saw this scene and thought, oh my god, this is such a man thing to do, but I guarantee you, if it was the other way around, they would have done the exact same thing. I think if women were to take over power from men in the real world, I think there would be a lot of rubbing it in too, and I think there would be a lot of hurtful stuff going around. But Ken has his little breakdown, and he feels bad for going too far. And this is where Barbie comes in to give her very much needed apology. As I said earlier, this is where the movie argues that the Kens have to start somewhere, and maybe one day they'll have as much power as women in the real world. So, watching this movie initially, you might not see the problem, but when you think about it, not only have the Kens been oppressed, but after having control for a little while and losing that control, they get to keep even less power than women in the real world. You could have maybe argued that it would be fair if they had as much power as women in the real world, but even less? Just to completely nail in this point, I want to make this argument. Imagine women in the real world being oppressed for so many years and always coming second to men. One day, women realize this, and they realize they can take over and attempt to do so. The men, who are the oppressors in this situation, use manipulation to take all the power back. After all of this is over, the women feel bad for trying to take over, even though they've been oppressed since the beginning. The men then, quote-unquote, comes to terms with these women and give them a position of power that is even less than what the women already had. At this point, it's starting to seem like the movie ultimately can't hit the balance, either because the idea of justice is just off, or the movie is trying to signal that men just deserve less than women. Personally, I don't think any of these are true. I think the movie was trying its best to make the perfect balance of justice, but couldn't do so while also having to please the more radical feminists in the audience, as I mentioned earlier. If you're hearing this and you're a feminist who doesn't see the problem in what I'm saying, then I really want you to take a good look at yourself and ask yourself if you're really a feminist or if you're just a misandrist. But to conclude all this, apart from what I've said just before, I really think this movie did an amazing job with the political message, and it really put this little thing called patriarchy in the spotlight to be seen as the horrible thing it is. Really just hammering in this point that no society should be dominated by one gender, whether that be women or men. And just bringing a bunch of Gen Zers together in all pink to watch a movie together is genius. I expected 2 hours of maybe a little feministic message, but I was completely overrun with how fun and good this movie actually was. I think that's pretty much all I have to say about this movie, about feminism, equality, misandrism, and all that. This is my conclusion of the movie. I haven't made a video in like 7 months. I'm doing great, by the way. Thanks for wondering. Thank you. But also thanks for sitting through me spew my dumb woke Marxist bullshit at you for however long this video is. So yeah, I just wasted hours of my life making a political video about pink plastic dolls, so I'm gonna go utilize my freedom and kiss a dude or something.